But that one will be changed, and we'll have Victoria Logs in there. But hey, welcome so much, everybody, to our VictoriaMetrics video on Victoria Logs. Today, we're super lucky to be joined by Alex. Alex, yeah, obviously the CTO, creator, and general thinker for Victoria Logs. So, Alex, thanks for joining us. Anything you want to say off the rip?
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm ready to provide you some insights about VictoriaLogs and cluster version of VictoriaLogs, which has been recently released.
Awesome. Yeah, and I know it's something that's been highly anticipated. Every time we have a call or a session, people are always asking about cluster. So this should be well received by a lot. I'd like to start it off with asking, we know VictoriaLogs does things better, faster, and manages resource better, but why did we add cluster? Why is all the noise, the demand, the interest in quote cluster?
Yeah. The primary reason why the cluster version of VictoriaLogs has been added is vertical scalability limits, because a single node version of VictoriaLogs can scale only across available resources on a single host. This means that it can scale to CPU cores and to memory and to disk, which is available on a single host. And it cannot scale to multiple hosts easily. Obviously, you can run multiple shards manually of single node VictoriaLogs and provide some manual scheme for distribution of logs across these single node versions and querying these logs. But this is not so easy. That's why we decided to create a cluster version of VictoriaLogs, which can scale horizontally across multiple hosts. That's the primary reason why we created VictoriaLogs. Some people, some users of VictoriaLogs were waiting for cluster version of VictoriaLogs because of different other reasons. Some people think that cluster version of VictoriaLogs might provide them higher availability compared to single node version. This is a common misconception because people think falsely think that the cluster version equals to high availability, and single node version cannot implement high availability. This misconception, and I'm going to publish a special blog post about this in coming weeks or months. So
yeah, I think that's going to be super exciting to read, because I know that when I think cluster, my first thought is high availability and then performance after. So yeah, that'll be an interesting one, because there are ways to achieve high availability without much extra work with VictoriaLogs.
Yeah, we can cover this theme in 2 words if we have time during this recording, if you want.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll go back into the high availability part in a little bit, because I know there's a lot to it, and I want to make sure that it gets enough airtime to really share your thoughts on it and not have it too compressed. So, next best question that I think comes up is, the architecture in this, the architecture for VictoriaLogs cluster seems quite unique, from underlying technologies that are used to the way nodes in a cluster can behave. So can you give us a real high level on the architecture, why it's the way it is, and what benefits you see coming out of that?
Yeah. The cluster version of VictoriaLogs has a unique architecture compared to other cluster solutions, cluster databases, because it consists of a single node versions of executables of VictoriaLogs. Basically, cluster version of VictoriaLogs contains of 3 different types of components, like VictoriaMetrics cluster. The first component receives ingested logs and spreads these logs evenly across storage nodes. This is the second type of component, storage nodes. And the third type of component is select node, which accepts queries and then executes these queries across all the storage nodes, receives the needed data, aggregates it, and returns back. So a high-level overview is very similar to VictoriaMetrics cluster, but the devil is in details. The cluster version of VictoriaLogs, because cluster version of VictoriaLogs, every component of a cluster version of VictoriaLogs is actually is the same executable, and it is exactly the same executable which is used as for single node version of VictoriaLogs. So we just download a single executable, single node version of VictoriaLogs of the latest version, and then you can magically convert it to insert node or select node or to storage node, depending on a command line flags passed to this component. And when you pass the storage node command line flag with the comma separated list of storage nodes, then this component becomes insert node and select node. You can ingest data into the component, and in this case, it will split evenly the ingested data across the configured storage nodes. And you can send queries to this component, and it will query all the storage nodes and aggregate the result back to the user. And another interesting thing in the cluster version of VictoriaLogs is that these components communicate with each other by HTTP protocol, because VictoriaMetrics cluster version communicate between components over TCP by using custom protocol over HTTP. Why I decided to create to use this HTTP transport for communication between cluster components of VictoriaLogs, because of higher flexibility. Because HTTP is supported by many proxies such as Nginx, HA proxy, and VMAuth, obviously as a proxy from VictoriaMetrics. And these proxies can be used for building flexible configurations, flexible authorization schemes, flexible routing schemes, encryption schemes, and so on. So using HTTP transport for communication between cluster components in VictoriaLogs opens up doors for more flexible architectures which can be built on top of VictoriaLogs. And the third unique thing in VictoriaLogs cluster is that a storage node and a single node version of VictoriaLogs are basically the same things. This means that you can attach single node versions of VictoriaLogs into a cluster, start querying them via single select node, and get global querying view results across all the single node versions of VictoriaLogs. And you can go back and query every storage node separately, send queries to this single every storage node, and also ingest data into every storage node separately if you want, if you wish. And this all allows building very flexible schemes. Also, I almost forgot. Let me continue. This scheme allows building multi-level cluster setups. This means that you can build multiple VictoriaLogs clusters and then run a separate select node, which will query all these independent clusters of VictoriaLogs and aggregate the results back and return results back to the user. This allows achieving the global querying view across all these results, across all the clusters.
I'm just shaking my head because that's a lot of flexibility that's just built right in by default to meet, where cluster needs to be deployed. Can be a challenging environment. So it sounds like we make that just as easy. We're taking away the complexity while delivering that. That's awesome. Now on the HTTP protocol as well, did you mention, I think I heard that it allows for integration of third-party things as well. So in stream, you can be doing things like enriching anything because that protocol is a standard across the internet, right? Is that?
Yeah. For example, very good example is if you have multiple clusters or single node versions of VictoriaLogs installed in different data centers or availability zones and want to query or to ingest data uniformly across all these clusters from different data center. In this case, you can set up a communication protocol, HTTP-based communication protocol between these components, between these different data centers over HTTPS with encryption and with authorization, and this improves security and allows building this advanced configuration schemes across different data zones, data centers, or availability zones without any significant efforts. It works out of the box.
Yeah, I think it's going to be exciting to see what our users come up with as far as other ways that can be utilized as well. Like we seem to have some very creative and smart users that are pushing the envelope. So I think this will probably start getting people thinking, oh, can I do this? So everyone wants to add complexity back to the simple things. So somebody will make it difficult for you.
Yes. But the basic building blocks of VictoriaLogs are very simple and easy to configure. And you can build arbitrary complex schemes on top of these building blocks.
Yeah. And the idea of being able to go from a single node being a storage node, VL storage, to adding additional nodes is great. And then also in the inverse direction works as well, right? Like if somebody wants to try out cluster because cluster's cool, but then they decide, hey, actually, you know what, a single node, maybe with some replication is what I should be doing for production. Going back to single node, is that?
Yeah, it works. As I said before, storage node of the cluster version of VictoriaLogs is basically the same as single node version of VictoriaLogs. This means that you can send data to individually per each storage node and query individually per every storage node, like a single node version of VictoriaLogs.
Yeah. Are there any challenges that are present when creating that one binary that does all of them? Is there any overhead? Is there any penalty to having that flexibility?
The only overhead is the increased amounts of source code, which needs to be added for communication between cluster components. But the good thing is that this code is isolated from the rest of the code. And when you run a single node version without the cluster setup, then this cluster related source code doesn't affect in any way the single node version of VictoriaLogs. It doesn't reduce the performance and doesn't increase the resource usage of single node version of VictoriaLogs.
That's awesome. That's a great design, because I know that's a question that comes up when people add functionality. Is like, well, if I get 10x faster, but what does it cost me on the back end? And the answer is, it costs you nothing, right? It just works. So
yeah. And also, I would like to add a very interesting detail, which I missed before, regarding this cluster version of VictoriaLogs, as the difference between cluster version of VictoriaLogs and the cluster version of VictoriaMetrics. Let's start from VictoriaMetrics cluster. When you send query to select node in VictoriaMetrics cluster, this select node queries the needed data from the storage nodes, and the storage nodes send the needed data in blocks. It just allocates the needed data on disk and reads the data in blocks stored on disk and sends these blocks to select node without any modifications, without any filtering and processing. Later, select node reads all these blocks from across all the storage nodes and then starts processing these blocks. It unpacks these blocks, filters the needed samples across these blocks, and then performs calculations, aggregations according to the query. This means that the scalability of querying path at VictoriaMetrics is some kind of limited by a single instance of select node. I mean, scalability for heavyweight queries, which need to read a lot of data and process a lot of data. If you want to increase the performance of such queries, then you need to migrate select nodes of VictoriaMetrics cluster to machines with bigger amounts of CPU cores and memory. And this increases the performance of such queries because they can be performed on a bigger number of memory and CPU. And let's return back to VictoriaLogs Cluster. The difference between VictoriaMetrics and VictoriaLogs Cluster is that select node at VictoriaLogs Cluster tries very hard to push down all the calculations, as much as possible of calculations, to storage nodes when it performs some query. For example, if the query requests filtering some logs and then calculating the number of such logs. In this case, every storage node performs this filtering for local logs and then calculates the number of such logs on every storage node independently. And after that, it sends these aggregated results to select node, and select the only responsibility of select node is just perform the final aggregation of these results, just perform the sum and return the result. And such scheme scales much better than in VictoriaMetrics cluster for heavy queries, because these queries can be parallelized across all the storage nodes. And if you have more storage nodes, you will instantly have higher query performance for heavyweight queries, which need to process a lot of logs.
That's interesting. So it's sort of like a bad analogy, or maybe a poor analogy in my mind, is a Model A Ford production line, right? Is where they said, hey, let's do all of these small jobs in different zones so everything can still be produced, even if one of these zones or queries is slower. It's not holding up the whole show. So that's really neat. Is that same methodology used in any other technologies that you're aware of that are trying to do similar things, or is that
yeah, that's quite a known technology technique, which is named query push down. This means that parts of the queries are pushed down to the location with the data, and in order to reduce network communications and overhead on the network communications. That's quite known technique, and it is used in some databases, for example, such as ClickHouse, or proprietary databases such as Google BigQuery, for example. Yep.
Okay. No, that's great. So a question is, if somebody wants to then get hands-on with cluster and experimenting, two things that sort of like to ask you is, one, I believe that everybody should try it, cluster, because it's cool and get to know it. But what would you say are some of the deciding points for where you would suggest, hey, clusters might be right for your production? Like, are there any qualifying questions somebody needs to ask themselves to say, do I really need to go production with cluster, versus I'd like to kick around with it?
Yes. I recommend starting with a single node version of VictoriaLogs because it is easier to configure, easier to run, and it has much lower number of possibilities to misbehave compared to cluster version. And also it is more resource efficient because it doesn't need to communicate over network, to transfer data over network, and it has no this overhead. That's why single node version of VictoriaLogs is more resource efficient compared to the cluster. That's why I recommend you starting with single node version. Also, single node version of VictoriaLogs is production ready because some people think that single node version is just a toy and they were waiting for cluster version. That's not correct. Single node version of VictoriaLogs is production ready. We use it in production for almost 2 years last year, so without any issues, and with our regular updates to the new versions of single node VictoriaLogs, and it scales pretty well. It scales to all the available resources on a single host, and currently there are hosts with hundreds of CPU cores and terabytes of memory, and single node version of VictoriaLogs can scale to all these CPU cores and all this memory and efficiently use all these resources in order to provide high performance for data ingestion, for querying, and that's great. And when you need to migrate to cluster version, that's when you reach scalability limits of a single node version. If you have no more hosts with more CPU cores and more memory or bigger disks, that's a good reason to migrate to try cluster version of VictoriaLogs in order to scale horizontally. In other cases, I recommend do not migrate to cluster version of VictoriaLogs and stick with single node version of VictoriaLogs.
Don't buy a school bus if you've only got 2 kids, right? You keep the right size thing. Yeah, no, that's interesting. So, okay. Now, when our users are testing this and going out, what's the best way for them to provide feedback, the good, the bad, and the ugly? If somebody runs into a bug or a challenge, is looking for some direction, or has an idea or has implemented something, what's the best way for them to communicate?
The best way to communicate back your findings, your feature requests, or your bugs is our GitHub repository. I recommend you filing issues at our GitHub repository for VictoriaMetrics. We have no separate dedicated repository for VictoriaLogs yet. All the development of VictoriaLogs is happening inside VictoriaMetrics repository. That's why I recommend you filing issues, bug reports, and feature requests or questions at our GitHub repository for VictoriaMetrics. In the future, we have plans to migrate VictoriaLogs source code into a separate repository in order to reduce confusion for users of VictoriaLogs. But this near future.
Yep. No, that's excellent. So now my thought is, now that everybody's been going, I'm waiting for cluster, now that it's here, what do you think they're all going to be asking for next? What do you think is the next big, well, we're waiting for?
The next big thing which users frequently ask is object storage, support for object storage at both VictoriaMetrics and VictoriaLogs. And the object storage, support for object storage is the next big thing which we are going to focus on in the coming months. And I hope that it will be released much sooner in a shorter time compared to cluster version.
That's perfect. I could just see all the requests flooding into you now of, okay, now this is what we want. That's great. One more thing that just popped into my mind before we wrap up the recording is when I'm thinking about clustering and scalability, I've got some experience with some other pretty well-known logging platforms, and I know that the resources required for them is fairly large. And that's sort of what the default thought process is for people in the logging world is, well, I need to go to cluster, I need to scale because it takes up so much footprint and RAM to run Java or whatever else it's doing, where I think it's a really unique point with VictoriaLogs is that it's so darn efficient and the numbers are there to show it and back it up. But the need to go to cluster and scaling is also farther away. The scale on the map is different, I think, for us. Is that true, or is that just my?
Yeah, that's true. And single node version of VictoriaLogs replaces in production big clusters, pretty big clusters of Elasticsearch, for example, or Loki. We have users who migrated from Elasticsearch with tens of nodes into a single node version of VictoriaLogs with the same configuration as every node which was used for cluster version of Elasticsearch.
Yeah.
And they were happy. They have better query performance and lower resource usage for data ingestion on a single node compared to tens of nodes in Elasticsearch.
Yeah. I think the upsides for VictoriaLogs is so huge. It seems to me that if you've got a deployment, you need more logging. If you're not using VictoriaLogs now, try it. Just put it in, throw the same data at it, and just see, does it give you that same wow factor that all of our users who are sharing with us, or most of our users. So I think it's super exciting. I know that cluster is something everybody wants to hear about. It's super interesting to hear that, yes, it's released, and yes, it's great, but it might not be right for you. And we're meaning that you might not need all that. You might keep with the simplicity. So I think that's great. And I'm looking forward to sharing more information and hearing back from our users what their experience is with it. Like, certainly fire it up, try out cluster, but you might realize that you don't need it.
I know that most of users like complicated things and like trying these things. That's why I recommend you trying VictoriaLogs Cluster and see how it goes. But if you see that a single node version of VictoriaLogs has enough capacity for your workload, for your future workloads, then I recommend you returning back to single node version of VictoriaLogs and migrating back to cluster version when it is really needed. And the migration path from single node version to cluster version of VictoriaLogs is very, very easy, because as I said before, a single node version is basically the same as storage node of cluster. This means that the migration path is just adding this storage node, single node version of VictoriaLogs as a storage node into cluster, and that's it. The migration path from single node version to cluster version.
Yeah, I love the design. I'm super excited to get hands-on with it myself, and again to hear what our users are able to accomplish with it. So Alex, thank you so much. I know we're gonna have a lot more to talk about around logs, and of course with VictoriaMetrics core itself. Like, there's a lot of exciting things coming up, but right now blogs is really exciting to me. Thank you for sharing this, and anyone who's watching will definitely provide information on how to get more hands-on, how to make sure that we get your feedback, but do share it with us. And that's that.